Is there anything, I didn't mean to leave you hanging with that. Actually, when I was thinking about doing it, I also thought that there would be time for discussion, but we're running short on time. But is there anything that anyone is burning to share about their experience in this little exercise?
Yes. As I'm approaching 65 years, I thought to myself, asking for something more. But it was good.
It gives us pause. We're in this world to do what we're going to do, day by day. Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to pick out the salient parts of what I have notes here that I think would be most useful to share, because it's 5 to 11 and I am cognizant of the time. Because the concepts that emerge from their research are fascinating to me, and it's all the meat of adult development. And I also want to make sure that your topics that you wanted to discuss today are brought up. But let me give you the headings of all these, and then we'll go into them individually. He talks about narcissism at midlife and all the issues around narcissistic injuries. He talks about the body. Well, they do, not him. Brain intelligence.
So, Sue, would the experience that some of us might have had during that exercise be construed as, or be described as, almost a narcissistic injury?
It depends on how you saw it.
Well, in the mirror, you're going to see a different side of aging than if you look inside yourself. You might grow in wisdom, you might grow in love, you might grow in many very positive and wonderful ways. Whereas I don't know if most people doing this exercise would have the courage to look in the mirror and see something that maybe was not as desirable. So I'm wondering whether the external parts of aging could be looked at as a narcissistic injury. And then how do you cope with a narcissistic injury? Do you cope with it in the same way that you might have as a child, and therefore it drags up some old unfinished injuries from childhood?
It could. We're actually going to talk more about this when we talk about mourning and liberation, because what you're talking about is working through the sense of loss. We don't have our youthful bodies anymore, but what do we gain from that, and how do we relinquish those old images and really appreciate who we are today? So that is part of the process, and it would be considered a narcissistic injury. Let me give you all the topics, and then we're going to go back to narcissism. There are issues around sexuality, around gender differences with males and females, and work situations. So there are quite a few areas of adult development that were covered in the research that came out. Under narcissism, it's really exactly what Lisa has said, that as we age, we are dealing with narcissistic injury in that the view that we have of ourselves, the energy level that we have, the way our bodies feel, the way our minds feel, our relationships with people in our family who are also aging, all shift as we get older. And what we do with that is part of the process. If you stay stuck in that injurious place and feel unlovable, unattractive, physically stuck, it can really drag you down. Because what do you do with that? This is who you are. How do you love yourself? How do you appreciate yourself? How do you get past that point of narcissistic injury? Now, the first narcissistic injury was during the Oedipal phase, when you realized you weren't going to possess mommy or daddy, that there was a relinquishment of that first love, and you let it go and recognize that mommy and daddy are the ones who are together, and that you are going to have your own relationship as you get older. And identification can be with mother or father. During puberty, there are so many narcissistic injuries, but there is also the hopefulness of the future. The future at that stage of life seems unlimited, and we're going to talk about that feeling from the parent's perspective, or the adult midlife perspective, as opposed to the teenage perspective. They talk about dealing with narcissism in midlife as recognizing that you are separate from parents, yet interdependent with people in the present, and capable of making a realistic assessment of life, that life includes suffering, that life includes limitations and personal death, and that you can understand that and accept it regardless of the limitations involved. Midlife brings conflicts between the wishes to deny physical aging and the need to accept the loss of one's youthful body. But the resolution would include a kind of a reworking of your body image and an appreciation for the pleasures that your body can provide you today. The one about brain intelligence really got to me, because some of the writings were about losing intelligence after you get to the age of 30, 20 or 30, and that your brain cells start dying off and you don't have capabilities that you had when you were younger. But study, and actually I should also say that a lot of their conclusions that they came to after these hypotheses are based on the notion of having good physical health and mental activity that keeps going. There are certain organic problems that can come about which would compromise this process, but that's also part of how you work it through. But the one about the brain got to me. Studies indicate that intelligence does not inevitably decline from the mid-20s, but that in the presence of good physical health and mental activity, intelligence actually increases in most individuals into their 80s. There is hope for us. Essentially, the adult brain is now seen as capable of structural modification, which means we can build new neurons. I always say that. My mother died of Alzheimer's, and I always said that is not going to happen to me because I am going to bypass it. I'm going to, you keep going in life, you keep active, you keep learning, you keep growing. I'm going to build new neural connections, and here's research that says that. Psychological stimulation and activity leads to the potential for continued growth throughout life. Same thing with relationships. When you think about relationships with your aging parents or your grandparents or even your friends, there are all conflicts built into the shifting images that you have of the quality of those relationships. And it strikes me that there are people who would say that their mother never really took care of them well enough, that she wasn't able to give them what they really needed in life. And the irony of this is then that in old age, we are taking care of this parent who did not meet our needs. And it's part of the reworking. How do we see ourselves? Do we want to see ourselves as someone who doesn't care, who abandons? Or do we want to see ourselves as someone who is now filled with compassion and the ability to provide this caretaking at this stage of our lives? The time sense, I'm getting on to the sex and the gender roles. It will come.
You hurry up.
I said, in Analytic Institute, if you're not dealing with sex and aggression, you're just not getting it. So we are getting there. But the time sense in childhood is most gratifying because the future does seem unlimited. And this is probably one of the biggest areas that hits us in midlife. We have a different realization of time. That's why these questions come up at midlife. What have I accomplished in life? What am I leaving behind? Is anybody going to remember me? Where has my time gone? These are the kinds of questions that come up in this mid-phase of life. And these are normative conflicts that arise in healthy individuals. And the shifts toward appreciation of time and a willingness to live life in the moment now is one of the hallmarks of healthy midlife adjustment. Okay, sexuality. How many people think that older adults have less sex than younger people? Raise your hand. How many think that it's because testosterone and estrogen levels have decreased? interestingly enough, and actually, AARP no less. This, let me see which one is, I think it was Dustin Hoffman on the front. Where is he? I can't find the front of it. I think it was Dustin Hoffman. But I left it open to the sex part. Here it is, Dustin Hoffman. Anybody get this?
What issue?
It is, I don't see it. February, March.
This year.
Yeah. They had a whole sex survey. How frequently do you make love? 31% of couples have sex several times a week. 28% of couples have sex a couple of times a month. 8% of couples have sex once a month.
What age?
And assuming there's a couple.
Right. Actually, that is a factor, which
You
I'll
bet.
get to with all these other things. I want to say it's their membership, so it would have to be over 50. But this was another one that got me. Do you get the sense that your partner often has sex with you out of a sense of obligation? 12.5% of people in a relationship for a year or less say yes, but 49.6% of people in a relationship for 21 years or more say yes. Interesting sexuality things. Mainstream, if you call AARP mainstream. In their research, they said that there is a decrease in estrogen and testosterone, but that is not the main correlation between the decrease in sexuality. That it has to do more with societal and cultural factors, as well as the availability of a partner and good health. These are also the variables that go in with that. They made the comment in all this research that there were many areas that they still have work to do. In alternative kinds of couples, in different lifestyle arrangements, single people, divorced, widowed. I mean, they don't do all that. This is just a generalized way of looking at it. But the fact that people can be sexual into their old age if they have a desire, good health, and a way to work in their minds where they give themselves permission is part of the process because it's physically possible. The family gender differences I thought were really interesting. They talked about male and female differences within the family. And we always think about parents and teenagers as having all this conflict. Teenagers are rebelling. They are rebelling. We look at it from their point. They need to separate from the parents. But what does it mean to be the parent with the teenager? Where is all this restriction coming from? Be home at a certain time, supervising their activities, worrying about their acting out or doing something. The way they approached these issues in this book were about the losses entailed in looking at ourselves through our teenage children. A father can see his son, young, healthy, sexually active, having a pretty young girlfriend. Maybe this stirs up feelings in the father of envy, jealousy, loss, and it's possible competition, and it's possible that some of these restrictions that they impose on their children are part of their own narcissistic injury about not being at that stage of life anymore. Now, hopefully it's also worked through to a place where a parent, we'll stick with the male right now because we'll go on to the female, where a parent can also appreciate the pleasure in raising a child and in launching them, in helping them to go forward in the world independently and deal with the letting go from their own sense of safety and strength and happiness in being able to be the older parent of this younger person, that you have done this. Now, granted, there are people who do not have children, so it's a whole different ballgame, but it's the sense of seeing yourself differently in relation to the younger self. We'll get on to work later. One of the things that it had said in the book was also cute, was the prospect of spoiling grandchildren is a fantasized expression of impulses without restraint. You think about it, we always rein in our impulses. Okay, women have a little bit different. What?
Some of us.
Some of us do. Women come in it from a little bit different angle. Historically, we've read about menopause being a time when women can feel old and shriveled up and sexless and unlovable, and yet research shows that women actually can feel liberated at this stage of their life. That there's a freedom that comes with creating something other than a child or caretaking, and that many women come into their own in terms of work and relationships and being out there. And Jungian thought is about the male taking on some of the feminine within himself at this stage of life, allowing that part of himself to come forward, and the woman taking on some of the masculine, and I mean that in terms of roles, not sexuality, but to feel her own power and strength and applaud it. And the same would work with the woman, seeing her daughter in a certain way and envying her, but also shooing her out in a way that she can feel good about the fact that she has gotten to this stage of life with her child. So this period of time is reshaping our relationships with parents, husband, children, friends, associates. Everyone that we come in contact with shifts as we go through midlife. Work outside the home is also potentially fraught with some conflict, because we tend to look at work as something that gives us pleasure and self-worth and productivity. Our retirement, therefore, can bring up increased conflicts about self-worth and time. It's a whole other area here. Now, I will say each of these topic areas are going to be discussed each week in the class. They come up with the clinical examples that were given, and we can talk more about the therapeutic process as you face these changes. This is just the overview. Are there any comments or questions or anything you want to add about these issues?
Asked us about how ourselves use ourselves. I just had this overwhelming realization that that's not the only thing that matters. Even though I know in psychodynamic theory they might be saying that's fine. But it's also how did you make her and create you, and how are you in relationship? And I was just thinking of the power that has to bring change and healing.
Your whole belief system. It would, and actually here too. These add a different dimension to psychoanalytic theory. So pulling this together clinically, the task of therapy is to help define the relationships between your infantile experience and your adult symptoms. But then it's to go further than that. It's to elaborate the effects of the infantile experience on all subsequent developmental tasks from child to adult. And then the third step would be relate these insights to current phase-specific arrests and development, leading to a re-engagement and a working through of the adult developmental process. And we're not going to go into the treatment process per se today, but we will in future classes, because the work of analysis, free association, the working alliance that you develop with your client, transference and countertransference issues are wonderful to deal with, especially if it's a younger therapist and an older client. If you have this countertransference feeling of this is your parent or your grandparent, or if they have a transference feeling to you that you are the child or their lover or somebody who they have not had resolution with in their life, there's a lot of room to work with that, and those are the types of cases that come up in this book. Now, it's 11:15. I had a case study, but I don't think we're going to have time to do it. The case study, because I have other areas that I wanted to talk with you about and then open it up for discussion. But the case study is in your handout. It's it's here, clinical example, reluctance to treat the elderly patient. And I mean, you can read this on your own then, and it's in this book. There's a discussion of it, and if you would like to, we can certainly discuss it at the next class meeting, which will be Tuesday, April 9th. But I thought of Freud when I was reading this, that, you know, there is a certain resistance to dealing with the elderly. We have certain fears about what it would be like to work with them, or certain stereotypes about negativity that goes along with them, and this is what Freud was saying. And we're in that phase now, guys, so it's how do we see ourselves in a positive, productive light as we go forward. But the obstacles and the stereotypes that they talked about with treating the elderly, let me just go through them here so that we can have them in our minds. Did I give you, let me just see if they're on your list. Yes, they are. It's the therapist resistance, countertransference fears on dealing with the elderly. The aged stimulation of therapist fears regarding their own eventual old age, potential disability, and anxiety related to death. When you're dealing with a person who is facing these issues, we're facing them. We may be facing them also as we're working with people. It's the cycle of life. Therapist conflicts about their own parental relations, and that's actually part of the case study that was there. It's a wonderful description. A psychiatrist was talking about treating an elderly patient and talking about some of the difficulties that he thought about in the work, because he had never really talked to his grandparents. He had never really known about their life or understood the struggles that they had, so this was all foreign territory for him, and he was wondering how it was going to be. I'm not going to keep you over. The felt impotence stemming from a belief in the ubiquity of untreatable organic states in the elderly. They have examples in the book about working with people with brain injury, with disabilities, that would make it hard to do a traditional analysis, but yet people who have these kinds of conditions can be worked with positively through certain techniques that we would also be discussing. So there was a sense of hopefulness in reading this book that I even thought about, because when we first talked about sending out flyers to advertise, and we talked about sending them to nursing homes, and I had felt myself say, no, don't want nursing homes. And I thought, where did this come from? Where is this resistance within me coming from? So I forced myself to call 2 nursing homes and tell them that we were doing this. But there is something internal that gets triggered, and it's useful to understand it and talk about it. 4, desire to avoid wasting their skills on persons nearing death. Isn't this awful? Well, fears that a patient may die during treatment. That has happened. And it's, again, a worthwhile life experience to be able to work through the feelings and the issues that come around that type of a situation, because it's part of our life. Also, desire to avoid colleagues' negative evaluation of efforts directed toward the age. Is that part of our mental health culture, that we see therapy as something that you do when you're creating and out there living and working through your processes in a very energizing kind of experience, and is working with the elderly challenge that in some way? What do you think about these resistance kinds of barriers and obstacles that they found in their research?
Well, it's amazing what prejudice is there. I mean, because it's so obvious. It's about our own attitudes about it that stand in the way of just looking at, even if you don't want to call it nursing home, just of course, some of that we picked up from society. It's the way the whole culture is feeling about growing older. You start to feel it more personally too as you get older yourself, and start to see these attitudes. People say things, and just what's assumed about yourself.
Mhm.
of thing, and not seeing it from the perspective of that they can also move through their past obstacles into a healthier mind or mindset.
Yes, that people can be helped through the process of therapy throughout every stage of their lives. You just have to tailor the treatment and the interventions to the appropriate connection with that person. And there are numerous examples in the book. This you'll love because this is a positive one. The literature indicates that older adults may actually experience less resistance to unpleasant thoughts, be less competitive and possessive because they have already accomplished certain life goals and are now turning their attention inward into who they are.
Well,
They'd be better candidates for therapy.
I feel as, there are some adults, I can think of a few that I know, that have really reached a place of maturity where they treat everybody else fairly. They act as a mature person themselves. They emulate the kind of qualities really we all ought to be seeking, but they've gotten there.
That's the wisdom of
Yes,
aging
exactly.
that Lisa was talking about. And actually this idea of rigidity, rigidity versus flexibility in personality structure, it's thought to be a function of personality structure and not of age. So that someone who is rigid in young adulthood is going to be rigid as they get older. Someone who is flexible, as they're growing up, is going to demonstrate that flexibility in old age too. I'll go over the renewal of interest in psychoanalysis, but I have to read you this one line also from Somerset Maugham in his classic work on later life, summing up. Old age is ready to undertake tasks that youth shirked because they would take too long. That was in this book. I want to do the last part first, and then we can come back to the renewal of interest in psychoanalysis with older people, because I think this is important to mention, the mourning liberation process. It's the working through of these types of losses that are the narcissistic injuries that come up around all these areas. There's a whole chapter in here, Pollock, who describes the mourning liberation process. It starts with a reality, a change, a death, a move, a divorce, a leaving home. Something changes in your reality. And the psychic investment that you had in that person, event, something is jarred. That's the injury. It's not there anymore. You have an investment in something that no longer exists. This can be very painful. It can be a shock to the system. You can feel it physiologically. There are all different ways that this reality shock hits you. And the work of mourning is to gradually relinquish that psychic investment in the lost object, neutralize those painful memories, and be freed up to attach this psychic energy to something else, to go forward. Any questions about that? Something to think about, but also very hopeful, guys, because this is something we go through throughout our lives. Change. I have clients who say they hate change. Taxes and change. They're part of our life. Okay, I'm going to take 1 minute and go over with you the renewal of interest in psychoanalysis of older people, the pressures that bring them into therapy. They're on the handout also, because these are the issues that you may see in your practice or you may be experiencing within yourself. All these sexual issues are part of what will bring people into therapy or be part of a problem that someone feels within themselves. Retirement or the threat of being displaced by younger workers is also a narcissistic injury. What am I going to do with my life now? And dealing with that sense of personal loss or identity at that point in life is also what brings people into therapy. Anxieties can arise in marital relationships after children have left home. Now the couple is alone. What do? Awareness of their own aging, possible illness and consequent dependence on others, and the anxiety that promotes. How many of us have said, I do not want to be dependent in old age? Shoot me first. And yet, the reality is we need other people. And caretaking is also part of our makeup. Thank goodness. Also, the inevitability of their own death and what this means in terms of their life goals. There are pieces in this book that talk about how to work with older people as they're nearing death, ways of reminiscing and doing a life review and feeling a sense of satisfaction in the way that they have lived their lives. And if there are things that have not worked the way they wanted them to, being able to mourn those losses and move on. I am almost done. Let me just ask you before I give my final statement here. Is there anything on your index card that you wanted to make sure that was talked about today that we have not covered? Did we cover everything that you had?
Put down creativity and older people that take on new hobbies or new things.
That older
Artistic,
people still are
music.
creative, that there is a
Yeah,
creativity you want to tap into.
Yeah. So what's that like is related to aging.
That maybe after you give up some of the pressures that you felt as a young person, your creativity is freed up.
Akin to that, I put transformation because I feel like we talk about mourning and injury, but welcoming in just a new sense of self and what you can do in the world.
You would like this book
I
too.
know I would.
Okay, so the case that is made within these books is that adult development is an ongoing process. It's not fixed in childhood. We continue to grow and develop as we go forward in life, and this course is going to focus on ways to do that in more depth. Is there any comment or anything that we have not yet said that somebody would like to say?
Just working in community mental health, with the young people who are just as rigid as any tenured person. That has to be
Amen to that.
Personality structure, character structure. Listen them up. I think we've covered everything. Yes?
Just one statement of why it's important to look into yourself as you're dealing with these issues as a therapist. And because we're an analytic institute, that's part of what our training is.
Good point. And that's also what we can do within a peer group in class, is to look at our own issues as they come up in working with clients who may be at this life stage or just within ourselves. That's one thing that the class does provide. That's what I meant about the interaction within the class setting, is that it's always opened up to talking and discussing and kind of chewing over topic areas that make it more personal for what you're looking for in the class. It's not just an academic discourse here. Yes?
This may be a question that I should ask after class, but what are your requirements or expectations for your students as far as homework?
Just to be here. There are readings. The syllabus indicates which readings. I found these books very readable. By the way, I have 2 extra copies now. I gave away 2 of them already. I bought all the ones that were used online. They're all available on Amazon used, but there were a couple that I just couldn't leave there. So I got them. I have 2 more copies of this, The Race Against Time, for anybody who wants to take the class who doesn't have the book yet. I'm happy to give it to you. So the requirements are to come with the readings and to do a log the logs that we do here are for CEUs. Now, if you don't want CEUs, you don't have to do a log. But the CEUs are the continuing education units, and the class is offering 15 if you take the 10-week period. And if you just want CEUs for today, make sure to sign in on the sheet because you get 1.5 for today. There is a $25 fee for CEUs for the presentation today and a $40 one for 15 CEUs for the entire class because we have to pay for them at our end. And the registration information. So did I answer the law? Oh, I wanted to tell people what the logs entail for those who have not taken classes here. The logs are just basically a reaction to what happened in the class. They can, for that day, they can be on an index card or emailed. We started doing an email system, and it's a communication between you and me. If you want to share it with the rest of the class, you can. It doesn't have to be. It's personal reactions to the readings and to the material. Yes?
Also, people here in town could telecommute in, right?
Yes.
They don't have to come. We like people here.
Yes.
Good interaction, but.
Yes, there's always different face-to-face interaction, but now that we have Google Hangout, we can set you up on your computer, and if you're available the classes starts Tuesday, not this Tuesday, next Tuesday the 9th, from 10 to 11:30. It will meet in here. I tend to like face-to-face interaction, although I have to say with the Google Hangout, we've done that with Michelle, calling in for a board meeting, and it really works quite well because you can see her, she can see all of you, and it's a live interaction. And for people who can't be available at that time, who want to take the class, there will be videos of each class session. It's just that you can't interact with them unless you're available at that time. But you can certainly view them and still get credit for the course.
That brings up just another possibility of a subject to talk about technology and aging. I'm thinking about people in nursing homes who can't get out of bed or have restrictions but could participate and how that impacts.
As long as they have the computer available and
Yeah.
someone to teach them how to use it.
I Skype with my 89-year-old mom.
You can teach me to use an iPad. You can teach anyone.
There you go. We'll be doing that. Yes.
A person in bed could use an iPad.
A person in bed could use an iPad.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
So
much easier and personal and.
also, I wanted to remind everyone to please make sure that you signed in. We wanted everybody, the sign-in sheet was in the office area.
It's right here.
Oh, it's here. Make sure you signed in and give us your email addresses and indicate if you want CEUs or not, because we have to fill out forms for them. Did I cover all the housekeeping details that you wanted me to?
We want to make sure that people know the CEU fees are
Never
either
knew
or. So it's either 25, 40 days, or if you want to take a course, $40.
40, right. Not both. Right.
At all.
Right. Okay. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. This was good. It's nice.
There's still donuts
Yeah.
and cookies. Help yourself.
Take some home with you.
Well, are you going to be in the course?
Oh, I should have said there's
Okay, well,
sign-up
I'll see you on the
information
9th.
here.
Huh?
Well, we have sign-up information.
Okay, take care.
Are you interested in the course at all?
Okay, sure.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
I'll go to the city because I was out of town. Now I'm coming back. I'm glad you made it there. Thank you. Okay.
KPI.
I have my own. Do you want to take the class? I'd love to. I'm trying to work those days out. But I don't have my. It doesn't matter.